Historical Society at Lane Place here today for our first, lecture in our Lessons in History series on the Civil War. I am Jill Coates-Matthews, the director here, and this is Owen Bennett, our assistant director, and we have the pleasure, or unfortunate pleasure, of listening to us ramble on about one of our favorite topics. So I'm going to go ahead and let Owen start, and we'll be talking about this, and we'll take questions at the end.
So before pointing out specific items we have displayed out here on a couple different tables, I want to provide you guys with just some brief information just on Montgomery County's role in the Civil War. Kind of surrounds us. It's a little bit everywhere. Obviously, we're sitting in the house right now of a Civil War senator. Right down the road, we have the General Lew Wallace study. Obviously, General Lew Wallace was a Major General in the Civil War, youngest Major General at that rate. So it's just kind of all around us in the city here. So to begin, I just want to say Montgomery County, Indiana, interestingly enough, raised about 2,971 soldiers for the Union cause. It's like quite a bit of soldiers for a city of our size at that time. With also that being said, we also have the legacy of having 5 notable generals in the Civil War who actually served in the 3 major theaters of the war: the Western, Eastern, and the Southwestern theater. So all the different theaters there were covered, which is kind of interesting. It's pretty noble, actually. So there were 3 regiments that you saw a lot of the soldiers go into. First being the 11th Indiana Volunteer Infantry, which was Lew Wallace's unit. The second one is the 72nd Indiana Mounted Infantry, also known as Wilder's Lightning Brigade. And then the 3rd unit is the 18th Independent Battery Indiana Light Artillery. It's a mouthful, so I'll just call it Eli Lilly's Hoosier Battery. So Eli Lilly lived that one. So each of these 3 units had served in battles as such as Fort Donelson, the Battle of Shiloh, Chickamauga, Siege of Vicksburg, and the Siege of Atlanta. So some pretty major battles during the war. Now, during 1863, during the Emancipation Proclamation, after that got passed, you saw some new soldiers actually head to the front from this area as well. So in 1863, with the enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation, you did see some enslaved people in the South, they get freed. In our area here, we did actually have quite a bit of freedmen in the area. With that being said, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation kind of shifted the war from a war just to bring back the Union to a war to basically say, hey, it's a moral war. We actually want to end slavery. And so with that being said, the Union actually raised the U.S. colored troops. So you actually started seeing African-American soldiers on the battlefield next to their fellow white man. So in Indianapolis, the 28th U.S. colored troops was raised, and you saw a lot of people from Montgomery County actually going and serving in the 28th U.S. colored troop. Now, something to mention there, they also had seen a lot of battle during their time, and I'll mention one battle in particular, which was the Battle of Crater. And I will say, if you want a little bit of a perspective on the Battle of Crater, I would say watch the movie Glory if you guys are interested in Civil War movies. Glory has to do with the 54th Massachusetts U.S. colored troop that fought at the Battle of Crater, but the 28th was also there as well, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a perspective on what was going on at the time. Now, another thing that I'd like to mention is, obviously we think of Montgomery County, Crawfordsville specifically, as being a very pro-Union area. Now, I do want to mention, after the Civil War, believe it or not, we actually had a lot of Confederate soldiers come back and move into the area. And that's something I'm still kind of wondering why. Why was there a large influx of Southern troops that moved, particularly to the Ladoga area? So an interesting fact is the soldiers who had moved back up here into the area, the Confederate soldiers, they had served in some pretty notable units. For one, Robert E. Lee's 42nd Virginia Infantry. They were there at the surrender of Appomattox. That's kind of interesting to see those folks here. Another unit is Stonewall Jackson's 4th Virginia Cavalry. So they were around some pretty notable figures. But also imagine what that atmosphere would have been like. Your Confederate troops coming back into the area in a very pro-Union area, not everybody would have got along too well. But they may do. You actually started seeing soldiers, if a Union soldier had passed away, you actually saw Confederate soldiers acting as pallbearers, even for the Union soldier, or vice versa. So they learned how to get along. So it's kind of an interesting thing during this time where you see reconciliation of the United States. Another kind of fun fact on that I do want to mention is that there are 64 Confederate burials here in Montgomery County alone, making Montgomery County actually a county having the most Confederate burials north of the Mason-Dixon line. So that's kind of another interesting fact there. So just want to get some of the general kind of facts of the Civil War laid out just ahead of the presentation before we started seeing some different objects here. So now I'll get to the good part, and I want to show you guys some different objects that we have here at the Lang place. Put on my gloves. First, I want to start off with some canteens. So I have 3 different canteens here to display for you guys today. So the first one, this is a model 1858, pattern 1857 canteen. And basically what I mean by pattern 1857 is that it has rounded sides. There were 2 kind of competing canteens at the time. There was the rounded side one, and then there was the model 1858 pattern 1862 version. And the 1862 version of canteen actually had like a corrugated side, so it was kind of ripply. They call it the bullseye canteen. So there's 2 different canteens for the time, but actually both of the Union ones that we have here are the pattern 1857 round side. So this one in particular is quite interesting, and it looks a little bit different than our other one as it has a cloth on it. The cloth did come issued with the canteen typically. If you lost it, soldiers would have used pieces of uniform or cloth to wrap the canteen cloth back on the canteen itself. Really, this served the purpose of insulation, keeping the metal kind of insulated in that way. But also, soldiers would actually wetten the cloth, so over time when it evaporates, it would actually keep the canteen cooler. So that's actually what it kind of served the purpose for. The canteen itself is made of tin plate, is what it is, and it basically is soldered. The 2 halves of the tin plate is soldered together to make a full canteen like this. One other thing that's kind of interesting is you think a canteen as such would just be used for water. Most times soldiers would actually grab an old canteen or one they had just found off the side of the road or off of a deceased soldier, and they would break it in half. And they would actually keep one of the halves and use it as a frying pan. So they would use one half as a frying pan and also have their own canteen as well. But this one kind of has an interesting story. You might be able to see there looks like some paper on the front of it right here. There's actually some writing on it. And on the back, I'll use my little cheat sheet because they have it written down what it actually says. So it was a gentleman by the name of Norris W. Victor had found this canteen and some crackers at the Battle of Shiloh on April 9th, 1862. So this is actually from the battle itself. After the presentation, we'll have you guys come up here and take a look at some of the items. And feel free to take a look at this one in particular. You can see it is pretty, I would say, battle torn here. You can see a lot of mud and even a few blood stains on this canteen itself. So it's kind of an interesting piece. The other canteen, you kind of get a better view of what the inside of this would look like without the canteen cloth itself. It's another, like I said, model 1858, pattern 1857 canteen, round side. This one is a little bit more unique, I would like to say, as you can see this design on it. So it was pretty common for soldiers even during the war and even after the war to do paintings or some kind of design, artistic design on the canteen itself. Typically you'd see soldiers, if it had a cloth on it, they would make American flag drawings or what have you to kind of decorate their canteen. This one, however, in our records has it listed that our local Grand Army of the Republic group had actually, a soldier there had painted it in this kind of patriotic theme. So during this time, you would have seen soldiers, let's say, having a reunion or marching down the road, doing some kind of drill demonstration. And then you can imagine, Union soldiers, proud that they had won the Civil War, would be marching around with something like this to kind of show off their happiness for the Union cause. So that's kind of interesting there. Now the other canteen to mention, honestly might be one of my favorite items in the entire house, is this one. So this is actually a Confederate canteen. I purposely put this one out here because I want to show you guys a comparison between Union and Confederate canteens. And one thing you might notice between the two is, well, the Union is metal, right? And the Confederate is wooden. So this is a barrel canteen from the Civil War. If you look really, really close, you can see the Confederate soldier's name etched into the side here. So his name is C.M. Smith. Unfortunately, I do not know what regiment he served at. I'm still trying to search that up. And actually, in preparation for our talk today, I almost lost my mind trying to figure out where, who this guy is and what happened to him. Some other things you can kind of see on this canteen, there are a lot of writing from the Union soldiers actually for the time. This one right here says Confederate Canteen, picked up at the Battle of Spanish Fort. And so Spanish Fort occurred in 1865 as part of the Mobile campaign. It's kind of the last stab into the heart of the Confederacy by the Union. What's interesting is it was led by General Edward R.S. Canby. And the most interesting thing about Canby is he was married right in there in the Lane Place dining room, which is kind of interesting. He led a big push out in the Southwest during the Civil War. But this canteen was picked up at the Battle of the Spanish Fort. So another kind of interesting piece and a good comparison between a Union and a Confederate canteen for the time. Another thing I want to show while we're here is this cartridge box. So this is what I like to call like the accessories of the Civil War, kind of with all of these items here. So here we do have a cartridge box, and one that's kind of unique after doing a lot more research on it. So let's make sure I get all the numbers right here. This is a leather man's patent U.S. infantry cartridge box. And so this was actually patented in 1864. And what's interesting is prior to this time, if you were an infantryman, you would have actually marched around, with having a similar cartridge box on your belt. So you would have one for like your just rifle cartridges here. You would have had another smaller one. You might have held pistol rounds. And then, it doesn't stop there, you would also have a smaller one that would contain your percussion caps. You'd either put that on your belt or you'd put that on your canteen strap. So it's kind of interesting. It has a lot of moving parts. Now imagine you had just fired your gun, you're trying to fumble for a bullet, you're trying to fumble for a percussion cap, whatever else you're grabbing. That's a lot to do when you're trying to get the gun set ready for fire. So a guy named Colonel William Mann of the 7th Michigan Cavalry kind of thought, well, maybe I can revolutionize this a little bit. And he did. He started this process in 1863, where he kind of thought of imagined a cartridge box that you can do it all in one. So, for example, the inside of it here kind of looks like this. It's really wide open. This is where you would put your cartridges. Now, it's not just rifle cartridges. You can also put pistol cartridges in there too. So you might have a couple rifle, maybe a pistol or so in here. And then this little pouch in the front would hold your percussion caps. So it's an all-in-one thing. Now the best part about it is, another thing that Mann had kind of said in regards to these into cartridge boxes at the time, he's like, man, they weigh down your side. Now imagine how much the bullets would weigh at that time. They're lead bullets. And you'd have a cartridge pack of them, or several, on your side just kind of weighing down that one area. Mann thought, why can't I maybe centralize kind of a cartridge box so it's not weighing just on one side of your body, kind of make it more central. So he literally made a cartridge box that would either be placed right on the front of your body, or actually to be worn as a harness. So it'd be placed right here on your body. So you kind of see this strap here. This one would have been for just a belt, so likely the soldier just would have had it in the front. Now, and when you guys were able to come up here in a little bit, you'll notice there's these little asterisk looking things here. Those are extra areas where you can punch a hole and attach shoulder straps. And so, but you can actually rig up a system where it kind of goes over the shoulder and across the body, because there usually is an attached belt that comes with it, and it can be literally placed right here. So whenever you're doing what you need to do on the battlefield, it's just all right here. What's even better is it was basically the manufacturer for such a box like this. His name was Emerson Gaylord, and he ran the Gaylord Manufacturing Company out of Massachusetts. Well, he started out in the harness making business, so it's kind of nice that you work with him. You're able to make these cartridge boxes. Now, I will say these were not mass produced, so not every soldier had something like this. They were actually given up to very few regiments. It was an experimental contract that the government had kind of bought in on. So really, you only seen troops from New Jersey, New York, and maybe Pennsylvania using a box like this. So it's kind of interesting. lastly, I want to talk about some ammunition before I transfer over to Jill. So we do have several different types of ammunition here. Starting off with these two. So we have these two pieces here. These are lead balls. They were, cast of lead balls. And they were used for kind of two different types of artillery shell at the time. So really the two really nasty ones, one was called grape shot, the other one was called canister shot. And so I'll kind of start off with grape shot. So I'll put this one down. Typically grape shot, you have lead balls about this big, sometimes they're even bigger, actually. You can imagine that, it's kind of a crazy thing. And how a grape shot would work, the shell, if you could call it that, probably about this big, there was two metal, like flat circular plates, one on the bottom, one on the top, and they were held together by a single like rod that went through the middle. Now, with that, there would be layered grape actually in here. So there's two different types. And the one I'm describing right now is called the tiered grape shot. So you have these balls kind of layered around the bottom there. There would be like a metal ring that would go between the plate and the grape. A ring, there's more grape, another ring, more grape, and then it's the top. So it's typically like 9 or 10 grape balls actually in the shot. So essentially this would be used as an anti-personnel weapon for field artillery, typically shot out of a 12-pound Napoleon cannon. So again, this would be lowered pretty much completely flat and just shot out like a shotgun blast out into a charge or into the incoming infantry. Pretty nasty. So that's the tiered grape shot. There's also the quilted grape shot. Quilted grape shot was not typically used on the battlefield for field artillery. It was typically used for Navy. And so essentially what that was, again, all of these little lead balls, but actually in a canvas bag. And with canvas bag, they're all placed in there. There's a lot of them just in one bag. They would kind of clasp the top and then they would wrap like a rope all around it. And the way they arranged the rope, you could actually see the balls kind of like poking out of the bag, and they looked like you're carrying a sack of grapes. That's where you get grape shot. And when this would go off, it would be more of a spread, because you don't have, it would be a little bit more of a spread, so like when this blew up, you could see it taking down massive ships or blowing off parts of the ship. So that's what typically used during naval battles. So it's kind of the difference between the two types of grape that were used in the war. Now there's another artillery shell, the canister shot, another really nasty one. Typically you would see, even about the same size, maybe some bigger lead ball or even some smaller lead ball, packed into a tin can. Actually, I should just say not just the lead balls, glass, nails, chain, anything you want to put in there, you can easily put into the canister shot. Put into the tin can, and then you would actually put sawdust in there to kind of hold everything together. So it's just a mixture of all these bad things all together. And then at the top, there would be kind of like a topper that's kind of shaped like this. And you press that down on there, and that's called a sabot. You press the sabot down on the end of it, load that into the cannon. The sabot had a pretty crucial role of holding everything in together in the shell itself, but also, upon ignition, keeping it tight enough so propellant gases don't shoot out the side. So you're getting just a clean, just straight shot. And again, the canister shot was used as anti-personnel, typically for an infantry charge coming in, or just to have a scatter shot towards the infantry in general. So pretty nasty items. So we have 2 artillery items here. The next item I want to pull out is called a caltrope. A caltrope is this nasty little plane jack looking thing. And what's interesting is this is nothing new to the Civil War. It's really nothing new to warfare in general during this time. People have been using caltropes ever since 331 BC. Macedonia, you typically saw these. Theirs looked a little bit more nastier, a little bit longer and sharper on the edges. But during the Civil War, these were basically just iron star-looking apparatuses that they had made. You would essentially just lay these down on a road, let's say for an infantry foot trail that's coming through. If you knew where the infantry line was, you would put these down where they were going to be coming into the battle scene or just an area in general. or where you knew cavalry would end up coming through. It was used for a dual purpose. This was sharp enough at the time to puncture a shoe to wound infantry, obviously causing breaking ankles, anything like that to happen, but also was sharp enough to injure a horse for cavalry. So it's kind of used as a dual purpose to stop personnel or the cavalry from coming through. Now the last piece here is super nasty. This is really a big technological advancement for its time, and it is the Manet bullet, or the mini ball. And so, it's kind of what it looks like here. I guess you probably can't see it too well. It looks more kind of like a more modern bullet. But this Manet bullet was established in 1846 by a guy, I'm sure I'm going to butcher his name, but it was a French officer named Claude Etienne Manet. And it was essentially a soft lead bullet with a hollow base. Let's see what that looks like in here. And it was intended for rifled muskets. Now, the thing is, Americans didn't end up using a Manet bullet until around the 1850s, around 1855, when they started making their way over here. And actually, Jefferson Davis, who would be the future Confederate president, was actually the one who convinced basically the U.S. government to say, hey, why don't we end up taking this type of ammunition in? But again, you know, rifle weaponry has been around since the 1840s, but during the beginning of the Civil War, a lot of men were using smooth bore guns. So they didn't have the rifling in the barrel, you're just using regular musket balls, very inaccurate. Lots of times the smooth bore just lobbed the bullet just downward, not really doing too much damage. So it's kind of an interesting thing with the Civil War, where you're starting to see, you know, it's a period of technological advancement, but at the same time, people are holding on to tradition. So again, very beginning of the Civil War, smooth bore weapons are typically what's used until you start seeing more rifled guns reach the battlefield. Once that happens, commanders were going, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? Like we're using Napoleonic style fighting, so we're all standing here in lines shooting at each other just merely yards away. And these new rifled guns are absolutely tearing people apart, these new Manet bullets. And mind you, I didn't mention it before, a smooth bore firearm would only shoot 50 to 100 yards. A Manet bullet and a rifle barrel would shoot up to 350 yards. So it just increased your range of the kill zone at the time. And soldiers who were standing just in close distance, that didn't end too well, you know, with that modernization of warfare right there. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Now, once the rifled guns did reach the battlefield, you did see an uptick in casualty, and you did see an uptick in obviously Civil War injury as well. And amputation rates just went astronomical at this rate. So it's kind of interesting. You see a military technological advancement that actually, believe it or not, kind of helped out the hospital systems. It's kind of interesting to think about. When you're seeing more soldiers go in because they need help after getting injured, doctors started paying kind of attention to disease transmission. Like, how is disease getting spread? How is this, you know, how are these things getting affected when we're seeing all these soldiers come through? So the Manet bullet not only revolutionized that aspect of the Civil War militaristically, just kind of see advancements in hospital work as well. That's kind of an interesting thing, a nice leeway into Jill.
So at the end, I have some replica bullets here for the Manet and a musket ball that you guys can come up and take a look at. It's interesting to kind of see how it's kind of hollowed. Like, I'll kind of talk about some of the differences there. But I think I could just jump in and start talking about the surgeon's kit, but I think it's important to talk a little bit about what Owen started to touch on there was germ theory. Germ theory is kind of an interesting way how it plays into the Civil War and the medical field and into the transformation of the hospital system. Germ theory actually started to come around back in 1650s. During a plague outbreak, scientists actually discovered that there were some microorganisms in plague victims' blood. So it's kind of interesting that that's kind of where all of that scientific research kind of starts at for germ theory. But really in 1861, right at the beginning of the Civil War, you have Louis Pasteur publishing an article basically laying out germ theory. And that was brand new, really how he kind of pulled it all together. But it was right at the beginning of the Civil War. The Civil War had taken place just 5 years later. The whole outcome would have been very different. So it's really amazing. Timing is really everything sometimes. So in 1861, that theory was coming over to America, and scientists and doctors were kind of like, okay, maybe there's some, some truth behind this, but they weren't really fully accepting it. And instead there was a competing theory at the time called miasma theory. And miasma theory basically said that the diseases were spread through bad air or poisonous fumes. So if you think about how you treat and how you take care of people, that's very different than if you're considering contact and cleanliness being an issue. So the way they perceived everything was very, very different from what we think of today. So thinking about germ theory again, and how the war was set up and how armies just in general operate at the time. You have not only soldiers poor sanitation for their personal bodies, but poor sanitation setups in the camp. Camps are really overcrowded with people and animals really close together. And because of that closeness, you have epidemics come out with things like, lice or typhoid, that's a much more serious one. Malaria is also going through camps. These people are also, these boys are from rural communities. They don't have the exposure to these kind of diseases like men and boys who are coming from cities where they might have been exposed at a younger age to some of these different germs. So they don't have the antibodies. So their immune system is weakened. They're going to be having poor nutrition. Everything just kind of builds up and creates a situation that allows for the Civil War to have around, I think the low ball or the mainstream estimate is 620,000 deaths. So 2/3 of those, around 415,000, were just from infectious diseases. Now, amputations were also on the rise, again, because of things like the mini bullet and the damage it would do to bone. If it hit your bone, like a musket ball, if it hit your bone, it was going to maybe snap your bone in half. If you got hit with a mini bullet, it was going to shatter probably a couple inches of bone. And doctors just didn't know how to come back from that. That's where you see more amputations. Now, there were only probably around 30,000 amputations done during the Civil War. That's what it's estimated at, which is a much lower number than what I think people normally expect, but it was a much greater number than what anyone had seen. And the imagery that people were seeing of people with amputations and the stories they were hearing were so sensational. It would have seemed larger than life. So, about 3/4 of everyone who had an amputation did survive, which sounds nice when you say it that way, but then you say 1 out of 4 died. It's really terrible statistics. There was a gentleman called Dr. Robert Liston. I believe he was a British physician, and he actually had probably the best rate for amputations. 1 in 6 of his patients passed away. And he was so well known for his amputations that he actually, these are called Liston amputation knives, named after him, because he believed you really needed a long, strong blade. It was very sharp, made of steel, and these would become your standard amputation blades in a lot of the surgical kits at the time. A couple of fun stories about Dr. Liston, because I can't help but share some of the weird things I've found in my research here. Dr. Liston, he was known for having very fast amputations. And I'll go through the amputation process here and some more tools in a moment. But if you can imagine, his quickest amputation took 30 seconds. Now, some of the stories associated with him are just kind of wild. He was so fast at it, and these are all well documented. Typically, like 2.5, 3 minutes was considered a little slow for him for doing an amputation. However, he's also notoriously known for having the worst death rate at an amputation. You might consider, well, what's worse than a single person dying? What if you have a 300% mortality rate for an operation? So Dr. Liston was doing an operation, and he was so quick that his blade sliced through the coattails of one of the bystanders, and the bystander was shocked enough that he dropped dead on the floor. And also in this process, with his quick knife work, he sliced off the fingers of one of his medical assistants, and the medical assistant would succumb to gangrene later afterwards, as did his actual patient also succumb to gangrene. So a 300% mortality rate for one operation. Needless to say, no one has beaten his record, and we hope that no one does. That's pretty terrible. But it's just, when I was reading this, I was like, this sounds like a story. Some of the things about this doctor is just really fascinating. Amputations typically, we usually go with a standard that's about 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes for an amputation on the actual field hospital during the Civil War. Not everyone was as quick as Dr. Liston, so it kind of brings the numbers up just a little bit. Now, some of the tools that would be used in the operation is they would use some of the scalpel blades, maybe. This is one I can kind of get to easily. They'd get to a scalpel and they would cut through your outer layer of skin, maybe peel back some or cut a flap to pull back. You want to have something to cover the end of the amputation, so they might use the scalpel like that. And then they might use a Liston blade here to actually cut through the tissue and muscle and ligaments. And this is nice and sharp, it's going to go very quickly. And then you could use a bone saw to actually saw through the bone very, again, efficiently. Everything was very efficient here. A little gruesome, perhaps, but it was quick. And then you would take an actual file to file the end of the bone, then turn that skin back over and stitch it closed. So really, it's fairly straightforward. I will say that you do hope for an injury below your elbow or below your knee. You have smaller arteries, so there's a much greater chance that you didn't have as much blood loss, which was good for your statistics. Above the elbow, above the knee, your statistics were not in your favor, let me just put it that way. Didn't work out nearly as well for people. They did use tourniquets at times, but it really depended on the situation, the surgeon's medical experience, and what tools they had at their availability. This particular kit is actually a full surgeon's kit, so it has a lot of more interesting items in it, and more than what a field kit would be for an actual military surgeon. So the military kit would be a much smaller kit. Now, a couple other things in here that I think are really kind of fun, because it is a general surgeon's kit. You have this little thing here, and it has two little ends that twist off, and one end, unfortunately, has nothing in it anymore, but this end here still has one. So this end would have typically have been a needle, and this one is actually called a spud, which is a very fine kind of concave needle. And these were actually used for eye surgery, for the removal of cataracts, or even the spud would be used for removing foreign bodies from your eye. So if you can just imagine having this used on your eye in the 1800s, I don't know about you, but it makes my stomach hurt just a little bit to imagine them using something like that. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet, but I'll get to now, is thinking about anesthesia. They did actually have anesthesia. Most surgeons would have used it. It would have been recognized pretty broadly at that point in the United States. Anesthesia was starting to be used in the 1840s. Ether, chloroform, even carbon dioxide. I can never remember the right term for that, so I apologize. Can't remember that one. That one wasn't used as widespreadly though. But ether and chloroform were used. They did develop things like the ether cone at this point, so they could give you small doses because they didn't have a large supply. It was hard to come by. Sometimes a blockade might be a bit of an issue, but usually they did have some supply, so they just do smaller doses, which means that during surgery, you might still have your body react and you might be making noises, but you are insensitive to pain. So anesthesia was just kind of newer at that time, but it was being used. Now, a couple other things here. Don't know that I'll be able to pull things out. I'll pull out things later or point to them afterwards when you guys can come up. But a few other things that I have in here are trephining tools and a trephining tool. I might be able to get this one out. I should say, the way this was given to us are a lot of items are wired into place, which is great for display, but really difficult if I want to pull anything out to show someone. But we do have trephining tools. I don't think that was going to come out right now. But it has like a hole saw on the end of it. And so that would be used when you have a head injury, that you could remove a small portion of the skull, or if you had an aneurysm even, they could remove a small piece of the skull to relieve pressure or to get through to operate in that area. Again, no germ theory, so it's a little questionable how well those actually went, those particular procedures. And they also have, this I can pull out, they also have tracheotomy tubes. So if you had different kinds of breathing issues, they would actually use these kind of metal trachs for breathing purposes, which if you've ever seen tracheotomy tubes today, they're a very different kind of material. It's changed quite a bit. but that's what they were using back then, which is, I think, really interesting. They also have bullet removers, they have obstetric forceps for use in childbirth, they have different bone forceps, which would be to hold bones in place while doing surgeries or resetting bones. So it's just really interesting, so many of the different things here. Now, something to consider, I mentioned earlier, 620,000 people passed away during the course of the Civil War. If you think about that in terms of logistics, it's quite a nightmare. There was, at the beginning of the war, no setup for dealing with this type of, these types of numbers for bodies. They didn't know what to do with all these bodies. So before this time, the way it kind of worked was that when you passed away, oftentimes you were close to your home or nearby, that you were able to be brought back to your home. You were cared by your family. They would take care of your body, and then you would be shown to friends, neighbors who might come by for a couple of days, and then you would be buried. So all that post-mortem work was done in the home by loved ones, by your family members. With the Civil War, you have hundreds of thousands of men dying maybe weeks from home. If a train ride's going to take you 2 weeks to get home, how on earth do they transport your body back? And for the vast majority of people, their bodies didn't come back home, because train conductors were actually refusing taking bodies because of concerns about odor, concerns about health hazards. Depending on heat and humidity, a body can start decomposing within just a couple of days. So there was no easy way for them to transport them back. Actually, with the first death of the Civil War was a gentleman by the name of Ellsworth, who was actually someone known to Abraham Lincoln. And at this time, there was an embalmer, because embalming became more of a thing in the 1840s here in America. So there was an embalmer that went to President Lincoln and said, at no charge, I'll go and embalm this individual that you know that was a friend of yours. And he did, so he embalmed that man. And that kind of set off kind of the tone of the Civil War, where embalming started to become more of a thing. So embalming at that time was quite new still. If you think back, embalming's been around for a very long time. If you go back 6,000 BC, Egyptians were embalming by removing organs and filling the body cavity with different natural materials. In 1838, a French man by the name of Jean Ganal published a work talking about arterial embalming. So by 1840, that had been translated into English and would have been circulating here in the United States. So you start seeing embalming parlors pop up, and it's more for your wealthier class who can afford to do the embalming, who have that post-mortem work kind of taken out of the home, while the majority of people still had that in the home. They were working with that. During the Civil War, that changes though. You see non-professional embalmers kind of going out, kind of acting almost as like ambulance chasers, where they'd be following the battles, and they would actually, this is I think kind of wild, they'd actually go to the soldiers and be like, we'll go ahead and pre-sell you on this, where you can go ahead and pay for your embalming and pay for your transportation, and we'll give you a card that you can carry with you. And then when you die on the battlefield, someone will find that card and they'll come to us and we'll do all of it because you've already paid. Strangely enough, the Army put a stop to that because it was considered bad for morale. If you can imagine, that wasn't a positive thing going into battle, already going, you've paid for your embalming. Just didn't help the mentality there. So, embalming became more of a thing, but the government actually issued General Order 39 that ensured that only properly licensed embalmers could go to mourning families and offer their services. And embalmers are actually told that, you know, you look for people who have more upper level military individuals who have passed away, people who can probably afford to pay for the services and pay for the transportation to bring their loved ones back home. So what's really interesting is that this was not widely used then. During the Civil War, you only see about 40,000 of that 620,000 actually being embalmed, which is about 6-7% of the overall total, which is really pretty small. What really set it off was in 1862, Abraham Lincoln's son Willie died, and he had him embalmed. 3 years later, in 65, when Abraham Lincoln would pass away, he would also be embalmed. And then you'd have your 3-week funeral train. This was really the first time where most people got to see a body who had been embalmed, and it was a national sensation. You see newspaper articles talking about how they were amazed to see Lincoln laid at rest, and he looked so genial, so kind. He looked so lifelike. Now, by the end of the tour, you see people starting to use a ghastly shadow of himself. They did, I've heard from Lincoln experts before talking about the funeral train, and they're like, the embalmers had to actually travel on the train with them because they had to kind of work with the body as they went. They weren't really using, I don't think, formaldehyde quite yet in 65. They were still using a mixture of different liquids like alcohol, but also mixed in with like arsenic and mercury and different things like that, which would have been not very stable. Would have been a little bit more volatile than formaldehyde. So it was still fine-tuning to be worked in there. Now we have some artifacts from the funeral train. I'll show this. This is actually something that was brought back by Henry Lane. He was an honorary pallbearer for the funeral train for Lincoln. And there's a note that's really faint here, so I'm going to read what we have transcribed here. It's something that Joanna Lane wrote down. She said, "Wreath from the coffin of Abraham Lincoln with the badge worn at his funeral by Senator Lane and other members of the Congressional Committee, April 1865. So that ribbon there is what Henry wore to know himself as a member of the funeral party. And then this wreath here is actually one that was on Lincoln's coffin. And you'll see different depictions. You don't actually ever see a picture of Lincoln laid to rest. They're all either drawings, or else if you do see a picture of some sort, it's respectfully done where you never actually see Lincoln's body. It's very respectful how they treated him. So having one of the wreaths here that would have decorated the coffin is really kind of a neat thing to have, in my opinion. But it just shows you how much one person can change things. Because of the widespread funeral train, so many people got to see Lincoln laid at rest. They got to be exposed to embalming, and that really was a catalyst for how death was dealt with in the United States. By the 1890s, you really see funeral parlors start to really come up more because embalming by that point has been much more streamlined. The formaldehyde is definitely in use by then. And dying and death are taken out of the home. As Owen started to kind of mention there, because of surgery and how it changed and how doctors became so much more integral for people's health because of technology changes like the mini bullet and different things like that, it really created a need for a more established hospital system, which meant that instead of dying in your home, most people were then dying in the hospital because they were surrounded by doctors at this point. It meant that instead of your body being cared for by your family members, it's now being cared for by a mortician who is a certified embalmer, because that wasn't something that was easily done inside of the home. Although you could find newspaper articles telling you how to do it, I didn't recommend those. It was very sketchy when you look into those. The fluids they were suggesting was a little strange. But you could find instructions to do it yourself. There's always a DIYer. So it's kind of fun. But the death and dying removed from the home, and that really changed how, I guess, really in the United States, how we dealt with death and still deal with death today. It's very hands-off. So it's just kind of interesting to see how all these different things in the Civil War was such a catalyst for change, even though people tried to stay the same, because it kind of went back to your status quo after the war. But people had already been introduced to embalming at that point, and it kind of spiraled from there and became this whole big industry. And death really became more monetized and professionalized because of the Civil War. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Owen here.
So one thing that you've probably heard from both Jill and I, at least from the conversation we've had so far, is change over time, right? Like starting out with just military, like the accessories again, you know, there's a lot of change. Like for example, man saw a need for a new technology for a cartridge box, ammunition change, canteens kind of changing style over time. And with the uniform here to talk about, it's from Montgomery Guards. Provides another conversation for change as well, and you'll kind of see where I'm headed here. So before I even point out anything specific on the uniform itself, I think it's good just to know who the Montgomery Guards are. So the Montgomery Guards were established in 1856 by Lew Wallace as kind of a local militia. By this time, he already kind of thought, hey, maybe there's going to be a larger conflict going on between the states, so he just rallied a local militia to kind of prepare for that. And so with that being said, a lot of the drills that he ran the men on at first were pretty rigorous. He had based off of a lot of the military books that he was reading at the time, tactical books. And according to some sources, he was drilling people from as long as early in the morning till midnight, and kind of making a racket just around the city. People were kind of upset with hearing drums late at night when they're trying to sleep or what have you. So it's kind of loose early background there. Now the men who were in these drillings did not have an established, per se, like uniform yet. It was just kind of homemade uniforms, grabbing what you had. It wasn't until about 1859 when you start seeing the Montgomery Guards have kind of a standard uniform. And really Lou's uniform of choice there was basing kind of a uniform off of an, what was it? I want to make sure I get that right. It's a Zouave uniform used by the Algerians. I want to make sure that was right. Algerian Zouave uniform. But he kind of did a little bit of a different take there. Usually the Algerian Zouaves had like a fez, kind of a grayish uniform, nice little kind of coat vest, even a little bit baggier pants. Lou kind of still used that kind of pattern, still kind of a gray uniform, baggy pants, but also kind of had a Greek style jacket, decorative jacket to wear. But instead of a fez to wear, Lou had used a French visor cap that had a red top on it, and that's kind of what the Montgomery Guards had used at the time to drill in. Now, during when the Civil War had began, 1861, after firing Fort Sumter, Lou really, his Montgomery Guards later became the 11th Indiana Volunteer Infantry, or the Zouave Infantry, during the Civil War. They first started out as a 3-month unit, but then basically re-upped. In 1861, it became a 3-year unit, so they served the rest of the Civil War really after that. After the Civil War, Lou obviously comes back here and he's very involved in military stuff at this time, serving down in Mexico, doing things like that. So really the hope of revitalizing the Montgomery Guards at that time kind of it wasn't as I want to say, didn't make a point to do it as much as he probably wanted to, because he was traveling everywhere, things were just going on. But around the 1870s, things kind of changed. Really, when Lou got back from being governor of New Mexico, came back, 1876, really kicks off a revitalization of the Montgomery Guards. And so, with that being said, in 1876, the Montgomery Guards literally come out with kind of a newer uniform for the time, at least from what I've read through. A uniform that was based off of the 7th New York Regiment. And no, I don't have a picture of the 7th New York Regiment for you to see, but it really is this exact uniform here. So you have a military coatee like this, dark blue in color. You have buttons and kind of decorative gilded linen, lines going all around here. And you also have the swallowtail at the very back end of the coat. And then paired with the jacket, we also do have the pants, and the pants are of the same exact color, just white buff lying down the side of the outside pants seam there. Another thing that would typically go with this uniform as well would be the decorative belt. So this belt is really, really interesting. It has the custom MG on the front for Montgomery Guards. And after learning from Lew Wallace' study, the MG in that decorative design did not really come out until '76. That was it's a thing that they had made for that. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. The other thing that would have been part of the uniform is a shako hat like this. So this is a military shako hat, and when I mentioned the 7th Regiment of New York, this is the exact style hat they had. And it was tall like this. You had a decorative kind of ornament on the top. This ornament right here, actually, after doing some research and looking at the Montgomery Guards flag, this is the Montgomery Guards seal, essentially, on here. You do have MG on the front, standing for Montgomery Guards, And then you can't really see it here, but if you come up, you'll notice that there is a hole at the top of the hat where a pom-pom had been. So there was a pom-pom at the top. Another thing, and each uniform likely would have been a little bit different in this regard, and that is right here you'll see a couple loops on the jacket. In those areas there, it looks like those slots were possibly made for a set of epaulets. And so you can kind of see it here maybe, but there's some clips here, and that would have actually gone onto the jacket there on the loops. Now, part of the mystery to me is the uniform here belonged to a man named Nathaniel Vance. And in the jacket you can see an NV embroidered into the collar, and there's also NV embroidered into the pants. Now my greatest mystery is Nat Vance was not a colonel, not a captain, not any officer of rank. So really what his jacket would have probably likely had, at least at one time, would have been a kind of like a Russian shoulder knot, like a nice decorative ribbon, nice decorative piece on either side of the shoulder, but not per se epaulets. It just would have been kind of like a golden kind of design. So that's kind of my greatest mystery, is where did the epaulets come from? It could have been, maybe he did achieve a higher rank down the road with the guards. It could have been, he might have had a family member who served in the guards, and then these were actually taken off of a Civil War uniform or a guards uniform that did have the epaulets that went on with it, because Nat Vance did not serve in the 11th. He was actually a new member of the Guards. So right around the time of 1876, when the Guards came back together, there was a mixture of old Guards, which was your 11th, and then your new recruits, which was anybody who kind of wanted to join. Because Lou, again, was trying to raise a militia. This is before you had anything like the National Guard or anything like that, so you had localized militias. And Lou literally started reorganized the Montgomery Guards in 1876 to kind of have that same vigor as they did back in 1856 going into the Civil War, because he was trying to prepare men for any conflict that would happen. Just kind of what I think is interesting about this. Now, the Montgomery Guards kind of fizzled out really after 1877, after they had their grand reunion in Indianapolis. It was kind of a nice presentation where they showed like bayonet demonstrations and drilling demonstrations in the city. But after that, it kind of fizzled out. Again, why? Lew Wallace becomes the minister in Turkey. So he goes to Turkey, and while he's gone, the Guards really remain quiet for a little bit. Now, there was a soldier, and I cannot remember his name. He owned a store in downtown Crawfordsville area. He tried to raise some of the Guards back up to maybe help with like funerary practices or whatnot, or as an honor guard. I'm not really sure how much really came of that. I will say, in regard to the honor guard aspect, the Montgomery Guards did attend funerals of military leaders, and the guy who lived in this house, Henry S. Lane. Montgomery Guard actually was at Honorable Henry S. Lane's funeral. He did kind of like a honor guard kind of celebration there for Lane. But really, after the 1880s, again, the Guard stays kind of quiet. And then in 1894, Lew Wallace kind of thought, oh, you know what? Maybe I ought to try to bring back the Montgomery Guard again. And if you think about a lot of the old Guard by this point are starting to age out. I'm not really convinced that they cared too much about wanting to do drilling. It was mostly, hey, can we just get together with my old friends and just hang out? So really at that point in the newspapers, then you'll start seeing again, Company A, which was all the old Guard members, and then Company B, which was all the new recruits. And so you start seeing, again, him trying to put together a new Montgomery Guard, which is kind of interesting, but also ultimately failed. Again, we've been talking a lot about change. Localized militias were becoming a thing of the past. The Montgomery Guards were becoming a thing of the past. And really what that had to do with is the closer you start getting towards the Spanish-American War, the more America during this time was pulling away from really like states' rights, individual state militias. They were thinking that, hey, by this time we should start having one uniformed kind of like military unit, representing each state, what have you. So really it was a push towards more of a National Guard. and there were several militia acts that came in place, and a Militia Act 1903, which also kind of helped eliminate localized militias and push for more of a National Guard in itself. So that's really another change that you see there that was kind of developing during Lew Wallace's time. So, yeah.
Kind of that time here. Do you have anything you want to wrap up with?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to take questions, and we'd love for you guys to come up and take a closer look, and I'll show you some more things here, and we can show you some more things. There's some interesting little things with the buttons and stuff over here, too. Thank you guys for coming. If you guys have any questions, we'd love to hear them, and we hope you enjoyed this as much as we enjoy talking about it. Thank you. Thank you for watching our first lessons in history of the Civil War today with us. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, corrections, please reach us through our website. You can submit a query there. Just thank you for watching with us today.
In the meantime, stay tuned for some more history videos.